It's great to see everybody. We're very thankful that you could be with us. Today is the start of a new series called I Love My Church. And I hope that you feel that way sitting here this morning. And if not, by the time you're done, or by the time we're done with this series, I hope that you feel even more that way. I'm glad Mark is asking us to write down on a board why we love the church, because I think it's helpful sometimes for us to not just say, yes, I love the church, or yes, I love my church, and I'll give the Church of Christ disclaimer in a little bit, but I think it's helpful for us. A lot of times we say that, but we don't really think about it any deeper than that. And so I think it's great to really think about some of the reasons that we're here this morning, some of the reasons that we love the church. And I'm going to be straight with you this morning. Our lesson is a very simple one. It is a very general one, but I believe it has to be at the very beginning to have this study make sense. And so if you're going to tune out, pay attention for about 15 seconds here, and then you can tune out. Loving the church means loving people. And if you get nothing more from the lesson, then please take that away. Because when we say, I love my church, what we're saying is, I love my brothers and sisters. And if you really don't feel that way, then you don't love the church. And that may be tough to say and hard to hear, but that is the truth. There are a lot of different places today. There are locations and buildings that we have to visit in our lifetime. Like it or not, one way or another, we will be there. Then there are other places that we go to just throughout the course of life. All of us have been to schools or the dentist's office, and for the most part, they provoke a variety of responses within us, don't they? When I say the dentist office, don't most of you smell that smell that when they're drilling a hole in your tooth? It's nasty. I want to put an image up on the screen, and I want you to either write down or think of the first word that comes to your mind when you see these places. How you feel about going there. The Nevada Department of Motor Vehicles. For most of you, I can see the grimaces on your face. For most of us, you know that means a day, or at least 4 or 5 hours, of sitting there of wasted time. But you know, as much as I despise DMV, it's not as simple as that, is it? Because our view of DMV and our view of so many things is based on perspective. I know very soon Alex is going to be very, very, very excited to go to DMV. Right? Where all of us go, no, Dad has a DMV appointment on Monday to take the trailer in. And all he's been talking about this week is complaining about DMV before he's ever even been there. That's how much we hate DMV. What about a doctor's office? Again, you know, I hadn't been there in like 20 years until recently, and now that I'm old. But most of us have a pretty grim view. But again, it's based on perspective. If you're in a tremendous amount of pain and you know that by going to the doctor they're going to give you something or help you overcome that pain, then aren't you happy about going there? But if you think that maybe you have cancer and you're going to talk to your doctor about a diagnosis, then aren't you terrified about going there? What about something a little more mundane? The grocery store. If you're hungry, it's exciting. If you have an app where your wife can continuously add things to the list while you're at the grocery store, it's not so fun. But I'm sure when we saw all of these, the first word that came to our mind was not awesome. Our first word was not fun. I put that one up for you, Nevaeh, wherever you're at, Nevaeh. I put that one up for you. But our first word is not excited, isn't it? Or is it? For most of us, some of these places are worse than others. But for the most part, we go there because we need to. Not because we want to, not because we look forward to going there, but because we feel like we have to. Did any of you say that you love these places? When I mentioned all of them, I saw looks of grimace on your face. I didn't see looks of excitement. Now you'll occasionally hear someone say they love the grocery store if they're comparing it to going to the dentist. But most of us don't love any of those things. And if you say that you love going to DMV, I'm going to say, assume you need some pretty serious help, unless you're Alex. I wonder what people would say, though, if I ask you to write down or think about the first thought that comes to your mind when you see this picture? What's the first thought that comes to your mind? Now here's the Church of Christ disclaimer. The person that I studied with, Glenn Osborne, I remember his pet peeve was if anybody would ever say, my church, because he would stop them and he would say, did you die for the church? It is the Lord's church, it is not your church. And while I understand what he means by that, I think we do ourselves a disservice by distancing ourselves from the church. Because I think when we say my church, we're taking ownership of our responsibility, of our accountability to the church. And certainly we recognize it is the Lord's church. But this local congregation is our responsibility. And so when I say my church, when I say I love my church, please understand the overall context of what we're saying. When you see a picture like this, honestly, I want you to think about what comes to your mind. Do you think about the church in the same way we think about going to DMV or to the doctor's office or one of those others? Or is it just a place that we have to go to? I'm sure probably some of our younger ones sometimes feel that way. Mom and Dad go to church on Sunday morning, and so I have to get up early and go. We have all kinds of different feelings, don't we? Think about people who aren't with us here today. Or people who will never step foot in a church. Think about when they see this, what would they think? They would probably describe going to church much like we describe the experiences at DMV or the doctor's office. And a lot of it depends on our perspective. When you see the church building, when you think about a church, do you see it as a place of judgment? Or do you see it as a place of freedom? Do you see it as a place where your family can support you? Or where people are there to look down on you because of decisions you've made? So much of our view is dependent upon our perspective. And the reality is, those who have a dim view of the church, I think quite often we have given them that view. That's hard to say, but I think so often we have given them that view. But that's not the way God intended the church to be. His idea was for us to be a different kind of community of people. And I believe that the Bible shows us that this feeling was not God's plan for the church. He wants us to love the church. So how do we get there? How do we become the community God intends us to be? Our starting point this morning is going to be taken from John chapter 13. In verse 34, their scripture says, a new commandment I give you, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also are to love one another. Now I want us to keep in mind that this verse was a prelude to the church to come. When this verse was written, the church was not out. The church was not established. I guess that's a better word. When this verse was written, the church was not established. But he is giving us a prelude of something to come. The church will start in Acts. But here Jesus tells his disciples that as followers of him, here's how we should be known to the world. They will be a people known for their love for one another. Church people are meant to love one another. Now, as simple as that sounds, that's not an elective. That's not something we can choose not to do. It's a command from Jesus. What does it mean to love one another? What does it mean to love one another the same way that God loved the church, that Jesus loved the church? And what do we mean by love? There's a great illustration, at least I think it is, on May 2nd, 1962. There was a very dramatic advertisement that was ran in the San Francisco Examiner. A wife wrote this. She said, I don't want my husband to die in the gas chamber for a crime he did not commit. I will therefore offer my services for 10 years as a cook, maid, or housekeeper to any leading attorney who will defend him and bring about his vindication. How much do you love your spouse? Do you love your spouse enough to give away 10 years of your life so that they can have freedom. One of San Francisco's greatest attorneys, Vincent Hallinan, read or heard about the ad that was placed by Gladys Kidd. Her husband, Robert Lee Kidd, was about to be tried for killing an elderly antique dealer. Kidd's fingerprints had been found on a blood-stained ornate sword in the victim's shop. During the trial, the lawyer proved that the antique dealer had not been killed by the sword, and the Kidd's fingerprints and blood on the sword got there because he had once played with it while dueling with a friend while they were out shopping together in the store. The jury, after 11 hours, found Kidd not guilty, and the attorney refused her 10 years of service. But yet she was willing to offer 10 years of service because she loved her husband. When we say, I love my church, certainly there are a lot of different levels of love, aren't there? Dad and I were talking. Dad and I went, Friday, I guess, on a 4-wheel drive trip overnight. And we talked about how much we loved it. But the reality is we're old. And that 3.5 hours of bouncing over the things was tough. And we love it, but I'm not sure we love it enough to do it again. There's a lot of different levels of love, isn't there? So when we say, I love my church, what do we mean? Do we mean we're not able to put up with 3.5 hours of discomfort? Or do we mean that we're willing to sacrifice 10 years of our life? Which way do we love it? You know, unfortunately, a lot of times I think because of our society today, we love things because of what we can get from them. There's a Chinese restaurant close to our house that I love eating at because they have great salt and pepper shrimp. Now, if I went in there for the next couple of times and their salt and pepper shrimp were nasty, would I still love eating there? No. I love eating there because of what they give me. And once they cease giving me what I want, then I'm not going to love them anymore. And a lot of times we treat our relationship to the church in the same way. We treat the church almost like a restaurant. As long as it's giving me what I want, then I love it. But as soon as I get a sour, a raw, a messed up shrimp, the church was never meant to be like a restaurant. The church is built upon relationships. And the best reminder of this is found in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 3 and 4. For I delivered to you, as of first importance, what I also received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures, that he was buried and he was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures. His death on the cross was an act of love for each and every one of us. Earlier in the book of John, he told us that it was because God loved us so much that he was willing to send his Son to die for us. Everything that we do is built upon a relationship. It is built upon God's love for us or Jesus' love for us. He intentionally loved us and died for us. But you know, when we become Christians, we're not just brought into a relationship with Jesus. And I think there's a big misconception today. There are a lot of people who believe that they can be religious without having religion. That they can be spiritual without church. And I think when we read through Scripture, we find that that's not the way God intended for it to be. Being in a relationship with Jesus means being part of a church. It means being part of the body of Christ. Being part of his family. I'm afraid today that if we view church as a restaurant, that we set ourselves up and we set the church up to fail. Because we have unrealistic expectations that the church was never intended for us to fulfill. And also we have to be honest here. Restaurants are not very often relationship focused, are they? They are self-focused. And this isn't loving as Jesus loved. This is loving the way that I want to love, the way that I'm comfortable with, the way that I see fit for my own gain. And the church is not supposed to be like that. Now, this is easy to say, but it's hard to do. Nothing is going to change until we intentionally love the church. When we intentionally love, we have a deep sense of love for the church. And we actively and intentionally practice love. Not just when we think about it, but we actually set time aside for it. That shows how much we love. But the opposite is true. When we don't intentionally love the church, then we don't experience the kind of love that God intended. And I think some of this is understanding that the church is not a restaurant that we come to on Sunday. The church is about relationships. And relationships sometimes take work, don't they? You know, Graham's, my mom, has wanted to spend more time with Carly for a long time. But Carly is, almost 11 now, and she's not like me. She's a little social, they call her the social butterfly. She has like 4 million friends. The other day, I think I had 6 or 7 girls spending the night at the house. And so anytime Graham says, Carly, you want to come over? No, I'm busy. Because every day after school, she has a play date with somebody. And so finally, Graham's had to say, okay, Carly, pull out your phone, get out your calendar, and we are going to schedule a time. That's intentional love, right? And it's kind of the same with the church. We say we love the church, but sometimes we have to pull out our calendar and say, I'm going to schedule time for the church. Otherwise, it just gets lost. Dr. Scott Peck writes these words. He says, sacrificial love has transforming power. Genuine love is volitional rather than emotional. The person who truly loves does so because of a decision to love. The person has made a commitment to be loving, whether or not the loving feeling is present. If it is, so much the better. But if it isn't, the commitment to love, the will to love, still stands and is still exercised. He goes on, conversely, it is not only possible, but necessary for a loving person to avoid acting on feelings of love. Sounds strange, doesn't it? But he goes on to say, he says, I may meet a woman who strongly attracts me, whom I feel like loving, but because it would be destructive to my marriage to have an affair, I will silence the feelings of my heart. I may say, I feel like loving you, but I am not going to. My feelings of love may be unbounded, but my capacity to love is being limited. I therefore must choose the person on whom to focus my capacity to love, toward whom to direct my will to love. And he closes by saying these words. True love is not a feeling by which we are overwhelmed. It is committed, thoughtful decision. So when we say, I love my church, I hope there's part of it that is emotional, that we have a connection to one another. But there's also part of it behind the scenes that has to be completely logical and says, Jesus died for me, and he gave me this group of people, and I'm going to love them. Even though sometimes, I don't know who to pick on. I'll pick on Nathan. I haven't picked on him in a while. Even though sometimes Nathan may not be very lovable, I'm going to choose to love him and choose to love the church anyway. That's what it means. But it means that we have to work hard to intentionally love the church. And sometimes that is hard, isn't it? Because people are not always lovable. Lori posted something on Facebook. I didn't know where I heard it, but I always say people are messy, right? People are messy. Because of that, people are not always lovable. The Carnegie Technical Institute said that 90% of people who fail in life's vocation fail because they cannot get along with people. I want you to think about that for a second. 90% of people who fail in their jobs, who fail in their vocation, fail because they cannot get along with people. Now, let's extrapolate just a little bit and assume that the same is true for the church. That means 90% of churches fail because of people. I think it's probably closer to 100%, but let's just say 90%. So if we really want to get along with each other, if we really want to be able to say, I love my church, then I think I found something called the 10 Commandments of Human Relations. No, it's not about sex. Christy gave me that look like, what are you talking about today? It's an old one when they use that word differently. But I think it's important for us to think about. Number one, speak to people. There is nothing as nice as a cheerful word of greeting. Now I know that sounds simple, but I'm sure you've seen people walk in, and as soon as they walk in, they sit down. They don't talk to anybody. They make sure to not make eye contact. It's kind of like Liz used to be during our Wednesday studies. When it was time for me to ask someone to pray, she always knew, don't look at Matt, because if I make eye contact, he might ask me to pray. So she would hide her eyes. Sometimes people walk into church and they do the same. It's like they walk in, they sit down, and it's obvious, isn't it? They don't want to be talked to. But we need to be the opposite. When we walk in, we need to be looking around, seeing who we can talk to. But at the same time, that means when we're talking to someone, we need to do our best to be present with them, to be there. I'm horrible at this, and I have to work hard all the time. Because when Carly is talking to me and my phone goes off in my pocket, it's like, well, I'm sure most of you know the feeling. Smile at people. It takes 72 muscles to frown and only 14 to smile. But smiling is harder than frowning, isn't it? Even though it takes less muscles, it's harder. A few weeks ago, I saw someone come in, and they had a frown on their face from the moment they walked in until the moment they left. You should be happy to be here. Number 3, call people by name. Study after study has shown that we love hearing our name more than we love hearing any other word. Be friendly. Be helpful. Now all of these sound simple, don't they? Be cordial. Speak and act as if everything you do is genuinely a pleasure, and if it isn't, learn to make it so. Now that last part's where it gets more interesting, isn't it? I probably shouldn't tell this story out loud, so I'll just change the names to protect the people. But I was riding with a preacher one day, and his wife called in on the cell phone. And she began to talk for 20 minutes about nonsense, about where she had been shopping for, I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying that, huh? Where she had been shopping for the day, and how she had chosen the blue dress over the red dress, and we were sitting there rolling our eyes at one another. But as soon as he hung up, he said, "Do you think I cared about any of that?" And I said, "No." He said, "Do you think I will remember it so I can talk to her later about it?" Absolutely. It wasn't important to him, but that's not true. It was important to him. Not because it was really important to him, but because it was important to somebody else. And because it was important to someone else, it became important to him. And I think most of us as parents kind of get that, right? There are a lot of things that our kids do that we don't care about, but because they love it. Am I not supposed to admit those things? Courtney's giving me that look. Maybe these are things I'm not supposed to say. I don't know. But I think a lot of times we don't care, but because they care, we care, right? And it's the same with everyone here. Nathan doesn't care about going out and shooting things, but he pretends to care sometimes. I don't care about football, but I know just enough to ask a few questions and look stupid sometimes. Look stupid most of the time. Number 6. Be genuinely interested in people. I think this goes along with the last one. If you don't like someone, maybe you just need to learn more about them. Now, a lot of times, I've sat down and talked to people, and my first impression is not always a good one. But then, when you figure out the things that they've been through in life, when you figure out where they have been, you start to be a little more understanding, a little more lenient about where they're at. And I think it also helps us to be more interested. Be generous with praise and cautious with criticism. I don't know, probably none of you could see it, but Christy gave me a really good look on that one. Because she knows I'm horrible at this. Number 8. Be considerate with the feelings of others. There are usually 3 sides to a controversy. There's yours, there's the others, and then there's the right side. Number 9. Be alert to serve. What counts most in life is what we do for others. I hope Lori doesn't mind me picking on her. But, when she was staying, we talked about some of this one a little bit, because she said she's really bad at this. Because her first thought is not always, what can I do for you? Her first thought is of all of the things that are going on in her life. And so she's been working really hard to say, what can I do for others? And I think that's an important thing for us to do. When I'm studying with someone who's going through a lot of times you hear the pity party. This happened to me, and this happened to me, and this happened to me, and this is happening to me, and this is happening to me, and this is happening to me. The first thing I almost always suggest, go and find someone to serve. Whether it's going down to the homeless shelter and serving food, or going to the rest home and taking care of someone, find someone to serve. Get outside yourself. Number 10. A good sense of humor. A big dose of patience and humility. Those are all things that I think that we can have. Just a little bit more. When we say, I love my church, hopefully it means that all of us are working harder to be this kind of person. Because this is the kind of person who wants to be able to be there for someone else. I don't remember which book it is. It may have been The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, or it may have been one of the other ones that we read. But I remember in one of the books there was a story about someone who had just taken a trip to Africa. And he was at a party. And he was talking to someone who had just gotten back from Africa. Now, most of our tendencies, isn't it? Most of our tendency is to say, oh, I've been there too. I went over here and I did this and I did this and I did this and I did this. Oh, it was so much fun. I did this and I did this. Isn't that our tendency? He sat there the whole party and he just asked questions. What did you enjoy most about your trip? Did you go here? What did you do? He never said, I just went there. I loved it. That doesn't mean that saying I went there and I loved it is wrong if it adds to the conversation. But so often we're focused on us rather than someone else. So what does it look like to intentionally love the church? And how much should we love it? I think we've already talked about this, but there's a great verse that I want us to read together. Christ also loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might present the church to himself glorious, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she would be holy and without blemish. That's what it means to love the church. It means to love the church like you love your spouse on the day that you were married. It means to be in a community with one another, the way that God intended for us to be. And that's what the rest of this series is about. That's what we're going to be talking about in the coming weeks. So I want to give you an overview as we wind down this morning of the things that we're going to be talking about. We show love by connecting to one another, by being in a community, by being in fellowship, by being in a relationship with each other. And being in a community means more than just knowing one another's names. Although that is a very, very important thing. Sometimes, and this is embarrassing because we are not a big group, but I have heard people say, what's the name of that person who sits back over? They've been coming for months. And sometimes we say, what's the name of that person who, Being in a community means much more than knowing someone's name. And so if we don't know their name, then we probably need to be working a whole lot harder. We love when we stand alongside one another. We love when we are connected to one another. When we make sure that no one stands alone. Number 2, we love by serving. God has given each of us different abilities, different responsibilities to serve, to encourage the community. And we need to make sure that we are actually using them. We love by giving. Most of the time we talk about giving, we think of money, don't we? We think of tithings, we think of percentages, but that's not what we're talking about today. Or I'm not talking about guilt trips, but giving is an indicator of love. Whether it is giving time, or talents, or money, or something else. And we love by sharing. Loving the church is not limited to just within these walls. It means showing the community how much we love the church. It means showing the world how much we love God with our words and our deeds. And then our last lesson, we'll have one more in addition to this, and that is probably 3 or 4 who will get up and give their closing thoughts about the concepts. So I invite you to stick with us for the coming weeks as we talk about how we can intentionally love the church. How we can leave saying, I love my church. Not just say it though, but show it. Now I know that some have had negative experiences with the church in the past. And that's not the way God intended it. And I wish I could say that if you stay with us, you'll never have a negative experience. But we're human beings. We're going to make mistakes. And so the reality is we're going to fail from time to time. But part of the loving the church is having an attitude of forgiveness. Is wanting what is best for you and you wanting what's best for me. And being willing to give each other the benefit of the doubt. Throughout this series, I want to encourage you to share with others how much you love the church. One of the ways that we can do that is Mark. I don't know who designed the logo, if that was Mark and Jay or Mark. Oops. But we have some new shirts. And I was going to wear it the whole time, but I thought it'd be cooler if I just put it on. Of course, now I'm going to look even fatter than I do normally do. I'm not supposed to laugh at that. So, are you clapping because I actually was able to get it on? But one of the things that these shirts do is they give us an opportunity for people to talk to people, don't they? Remember when we first moved here the first year, and people would say, why did you move here? And we could say, for the church. Remember the conversations that we got started because we could say we moved here to be part of a new group. When we wear the shirts, we get the same opportunity. People ask us about the congregation that we attend, and we have an opportunity to talk to them about it. It is a great conversation starting tool. Think about for a moment what happens when you see someone with a sports team shirt on, right? Either you want to go up to them and talk about how awesome it is, or you want to throw something at them, right? It's kind of the same thing with the church shirt. You get that conversation starting. Strangers that you normally wouldn't talk to might start up a conversation. I would encourage you, when you have the opportunity, to wear your shirt. And I would also encourage us this week to get connected in our Wednesday studies. Our studies are going to be a little bit different this time. I think I emailed out the study. If you didn't get one, let me know and I'll email it to you. If you want a printed copy, I'm going to set them on the table and you can pick one up after services. It's a little different this time because there's significantly more questions for us to go through. And there's about a 5 to an 8 minute video at the beginning that we're going to watch to kind of introduce the study. So I'm not sure. We're going to give ourselves a little bit longer this time, say an hour and 15, an hour and 30. Hopefully it won't take that long. But, okay, that came out really long. It's going to take as long as it takes. But the first time is going to be a learning experience for me and a learning experience for all of us. But I would encourage you to be part of that. And I'll set these over here on the table. And don't forget after church. Hopefully this lesson has prompted us to think about some of the reasons that we love our church. And so don't forget to go to Mark afterwards, to write down on the board why you do, and let him take your picture. He's going to put them up on the screen to cycle through, or this screen, I'm not sure which one, to cycle through, so people can see some of the reasons. You know, when Mark asked us to come up with some reasons, I was thinking about, almost all of my reasons for some reason revolved around a family of faith. But then I started looking, I did a quick Google search for reasons that people love their church. And there are some great things out there. Now I want you to come up with your own. I don't want you to Google. But what I do hope is by the time that we see them cycling through, that we will just have that feeling of, oh, I love that too. That's what it's about. We never want to close without offering an invitation. If there's someone here today who's never given your life over to Christ, we invite you to do that. Or if you have, but you need the prayers of your brothers and sisters in Christ, please come forward as we stand and sing number 589.